I need to preface what I'm about to say with two observations. The first is what we call a trigger warning. I know some people pretend not to understand what that means or to understand why it's important, but I'm about to share with you some details of scenes in Gaza that are, for many people, close to unbearable. And I put myself among that number, to be honest with you. And the second thing I need to do is to remind you that Israel continues to keep foreign journalists out of Gaza. So we rely upon much less detailed footage and reportage than we would otherwise. The question of why Israel keeps foreign journalists out of Gaza is probably answered by the events that I'm about to relay to you. And the fact that not having foreign journalists there leaves at least some room for carefully cultivated doubt and denial. So the Al-Aqsa hospital has already been reduced to such a condition that many people are sheltering in tents outside the hospital, and those tents have now been attacked. Some of the footage appears to show people burning alive while attached to IV drips. This is 2024. This is the 21st century. This is an ally of the United Kingdom. There's also been a school attacked. And the Israeli policy that is now under discussion or that is now being contemplated as something that may actually be underway is the brainchild of a former general and effectively involves treating everybody as though they are, terrorists. And I'm going to quickly tell you what the least intelligent analysis in this entire hideous field involves. And it is the suggestion that because Israel is possessed of an almighty war machine, if it really wanted to embark upon ethnic cleansing or, God forbid, genocide, then it would have done so already. Is that this displays an ignorance not only of military history, but also of basic moral decline, so profound that you wonder how anybody even offering up such a thought could tie their own shoelaces. No atrocity in history happened in 24 hours. The build up to atrocity is slow and hideous because, to use an utterly inadequate analogy, it's the mother of all exercises in boiling a frog. So you don't go in on day one and start burning people alive in tents while they're attached to IV drips. You claim on day one that you're trying to rescue hostages, or that you're only going to attack terrorists, or that you're taking enormous care to spare civilians. It's only by day 370 odd that you can undertake this sort of thing with some confidence that America, and to a lesser but still significant extent, the United Kingdom will stay silent. The second stupidest contribution to this conversation is the idea that if somehow the remaining hostages were released, Israel would stop attacking Lebanon, where there aren't any hostages, and Gaza, because Benjamin Netanyahu has made it absolutely clear that that is simply not the case. And anybody following these matters closely will tell you that the families of the remaining hostages are among the least supportive Israelis. Many of the families of the remaining hostages are among the least supportive Israelis of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration. But make no mistake, it is an administration that still enjoys great support in Israel, even as people object and protest to what is going on. The democratic nature of the country means effectively that they wouldn't be able to continue in power without a mandate from the electorate, and that mandate remains. And that's, where we are now. I don't want it to sound like I'm trivializing anything, but I think this is a moment where everybody can actually agree with each other. The hospital courtyard where people were sleeping was preceded by an attack upon a school sheltering families. That was in Nusrat. The school today was scheduled to become a polio vaccination site. Philippe Lazzarini, who is the Commissioner General of UNRWA, describes another night of horror tents up in flames due to an airstrike on the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Hospital where people sought shelter. A school hit with 20 people reported killed. That's where the polio vaccination campaign was due to be conducted today. That has now been cancelled at that school, at that site. He describes Gaza as a never-ending hell. All of this must not become the new norm. Humanity must prevail. Is it too late? Has it already become the new norm? In Lebanon, as you know, United Nations troops have come under attack. There are reports of Israeli tanks moving into United Nations compounds, and as that contributor to the news just explained, that is akin to a sort of conscious, if you like, attacks on civilians, and it is something that is being undertaken with, and here's the word that I think describes most of what we are describing today, it is being undertaken with apparent impunity. Some countries, of course, continue to at least make the right noises, most notably Spain and latterly Ireland as well, who have troops in the space affected. But of course, America, crucially, and the United Kingdom, relevantly, continue to essentially, I can't say turn a blind eye, but engage in complicity while also condemning. And without proper condemnation, of course, Netanyahu will carry on. This is a statement from UNIFIL, which is the United Nations interim force in Lebanon. Last night, a peacekeeper. Let's think about that word for a minute. A peacekeeper. UNIFIL's headquarters in Nakara was hit by gunfire due to ongoing military activity nearby. He underwent surgery at our Nakara hospital to remove the bullet and is currently stable. We do not yet know the origin of the fire. Also last night, buildings in our UN position in Ramya sustained significant damage due to explosions from nearby shelling. We remind all actors of their obligations to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and premises, including avoiding combat activities near UNIFIL positions. I think we've reached the point now where, and of course the condemnation of various United Nations organizations and United Nations institutions by members of the Israeli administration and members of the Israeli government is well underway. So I don't know how much you have listened to our coverage of this over the last year and a bit, but the point at which the really terrible stuff moved into focus was the point at which people who rang me would not answer a question about how many deaths would be too many deaths. Now, I appreciate it was a very simplistic question, but you had people in the Israeli cabinet who were prepared essentially to suggest that there was no such thing as an innocent Arab. They would certainly claim that there was no such thing as an innocent life in Gaza. The ludicrous and frankly insulting insistence that great measures are taken to spare civilians should never really have been allowed to see the light of day. But it didn't just see the light of day. It got rolled up so many flagpoles in the United Kingdom and the United States that it became actually a sort of accepted analysis of a situation despite being completely at odds with all available statistical evidence. But that, to me, and I apologise for reducing it down to the conversations that we've had, but that's all I've done. That's all I've done, is have conversations. And God, it feels inadequate, doesn't it, when I'm reporting to you that I have seen footage this morning of people burning alive while apparently still attached to IV facilities, IV equipment in tents to which they have been consigned as a consequence of the hospital in the courtyard of which these tents have been erected being either completely unfit for purpose due to previous bombings or utterly inundated. So the idea that inability to answer the question of how much looked like too much, how much would constitute, if you like, disproportionality? How far did entitlement reach? And I had this terrifying fear, and I told you at the time, that people didn't have the guts to say out loud what some members of the Israeli cabinet were saying, that they didn't really think there was a limit on how many people could die or be killed by the Israeli defence force. You could hear it sometimes in the voice. You could hear the fury about even being asked the question. You'd simply say, well, how many is too many? It's 40,000 now, or it's 20,000 now. Will 30,000 be too many? And this, to my mind, utterly spurious notion that you're going to eradicate Hamas or get the hostages released by killing tens of thousands of civilians. And when perhaps the bloodlust was no longer being satisfied by what was going on in Gaza, they turned their attention to Lebanon and start killing civilians there. And up to and including, it would appear, United Nations peacekeepers, at least attacking. So is this a moment, and this is what I mean about the fear of sounding as if I'm trivialising it, is this a moment where finally everyone can actually agree that Benjamin Netanyahu's administration is embarked upon a course of utterly detached impunity? They care not a jot what the rest of the world may think. They don't care about the United Nations. They don't care about their allies in the United States or indeed in the United Kingdom. They don't care about the civilian death toll. They don't care about the burning children. They don't care about anything, really, except continuing this, I don't know what you would call it now, carnage? Dozens of Israeli soldiers were hurt after Hezbollah said it struck a military base with a swarm of drones. So, I mean, again, looking at the early coverage of the events of the last 24 hours, it looks at the moment like Hezbollah is making more effort to confine its attacks to military sites than Israel is. Just in the context of that attack, obviously the missiles continue to fly into northern Israel. So a squadron of attack drones crossed the border into northern Israel. And I will get now probably 5,000 text messages accusing me of imbalance for pointing out that nobody died. Nobody has been filmed burning alive. No children are now being mourned by displaced parents. So is this the moment at which everybody can agree that Benjamin Netanyahu's government is completely without, what's the word I want? Completely without, what's the word I want? Conscience? Pause? Unstoppable? There is literally nothing in place in this context now that could be meaningfully described as a deterrent to continuing the killing. Because countries have called for it. Individuals have called for it. Allies have called for it. People in Israel have called for it. The point now is that every death, you can no longer pretend that it's a question of proportionality or that it's a question of ebb and flow. We have reached the point that everybody feared. Everybody who has insisted for the last year and a bit that they feel no more or less horror at the thought of a burning Israeli than they do at the thought of a burning Palestinian. There is no hierarchy of human value for so many people who are not personally invested in the region, the politics or the war. And the greatest fear of people like them, people like me, the greatest fear has always been that extremist attitude inserted into the very heart of government by Benjamin Netanyahu as an exercise entirely in self-preservation is now just government policy. We will carry on we can't even tell you why we're killing anymore. Oh, we're trying to eradicate Hezbollah, or we're trying to eradicate Hamas, or we're trying to get the hostages released. How does burning people alive while they're hooked up to IV facilities, and if that in any way turns out not to be true, the reason why it's being so widely reported today is because Israel won't let journalists into the region from overseas. This is just the point, isn't it? I mean, it's almost as if the debate is over. Israel is going to do whatever it wants. Israel is going to display absolutely zero compassion or compunction in its continuing carnage, in its continuing killing of civilians in Lebanon, peacekeeping, it would appear, forces and civilians in Gaza. Israel has gone completely rogue. And the weird thing is that I don't think there's any debate to have here. Because you can't, with a straight face, claim that Israel is demonstrating compassion or Israel is demonstrating restraint or Israel is still enjoying proportionality. This is now gone. And because it's a boiled frog, because it's a slow increase. I mean, it's only a year and a bit since I was sitting here trying to explain to you why nobody could expect Israel not to respond in an incredibly violent fashion, why Hamas had handed Israel the right to exact appalling revenge upon territories that sheltered Hamas. And I believed it then and I still believe it now. But my God, we passed the point of proportionality. We passed the point of entitlement. We passed the point of retaliation. God knows how long ago. Be a different point for many people. For me, probably, the point at which my alarms started ringing loudest was the point at which they started bombing the places to which they told the people to move to stay safe. An experience that Lebanese civilians are now sharing in, following the experiences in Gaza. 90 minutes after 10 is the time. That's it, isn't it? This is the point at which no one can pretend anymore that there is any break upon Netanyahu's murderous ambitions. There is no compassion to be exercised. There is no compunction to be applied. This is it. I don't know how it ends. I don't know the point in asking how it ends. I just know that the Israeli army is going to carry on butchering civilians on a scale that is almost beyond belief, because they have established without any doubt whatsoever that if there are any people in the world capable of stopping them, it would be Joe Biden, and he is not going to do it. So that's where we are.